we are also well aware of Judy Wood and her theories. The reason we don't support her or her theories is that they are outside the scope of our message. So, and it goes on a bit after that, but you can see they've got the scope of their message, but there's no mention of evidence, and there's no mention of truth. So, and there's no mention of the Keatam case, for example, and how this has been put into a legal framework. So, they're basically happy to ignore all of that and lead all these other 1,000 members essentially down a blind alley.
But they were notified about the case going to the Supreme Court, and one of the members emailed it to Richard Gage and his core agents there, and they were angry and wrote back and said, we don't want to ever hear about this again.
Yeah, that's right. We've got this from somebody who's involved in this group. Marshall, I am not interested in the topic of this email. Do not include me on any future emails. And this is in response to a message.
Announcement is going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
It's very strange, isn't it?
It's almost, I mean, to be honest, I've written about this, and to me, actually, although it's quite shocking to say it, and, even more controversial, it looks like mind control is going on. There's some type of mind control going on here. It's almost like this, I don't know how much you've looked at these mind control programs like Monarch. The Monarch program and Project Naomi, MK Naomi rather, and MK Ultra, and these projects. It's almost like this thermite is like a coded activation message of some kind, that's been put out into the wider community, and you get all these truthlings repeating it, and anything else has to be drowned out, attacked, discredited, etc. Yes. So that's been our experience, and it's pretty it's pretty hard to deal with for people. There's a lot to take on board. I mean, let's look at a quick review. We're talking about anti-gravity technology. We're talking about limitless energy. We're talking about the fossil fuel fraud of the last 100 years. We're talking about weather control. It's an awful lot to take on board and digest and come up to speed with. But the only way you're going to do it is simply by looking at the evidence, and if you like Dr. Judy and I, and you want to do that, then it's very likely that you'll come to the same point as we have, and you'll be attacked in the same way that we have. But you'll know in your heart of hearts that you've been searching for the truth, and you've tried to continually review the evidence and listen to what it's telling you, because that is the way of finding the truth. And that's what we're interested in, and that's why I'm sat here talking to you tonight. Yeah.
Well, scientists for 9/11, for instance, should surely then follow the scientific method, and you don't start the scientific method with the conclusion and then limit the scope of your investigations to only that which will support your conclusion. These are supposed to be scientists. That's no way to do a scientific research project, is to say, well, we won't look at anything that doesn't fit our hypothesis for fear that it proves us wrong. It's just bizarre.
I have a foreword to my book, and I'd like to read just the start of it, and I say, for the record, I do not believe that our government is responsible for executing the events of 9/11, nor do I believe that our government is not responsible for these events. It is not a case of belief. It is a crime that should be investigated by a forensic study of the evidence. Before it can be determined who did it, it must first be determined what was done and how it was done.
And that's not going to happen by them deliberately limiting the scope of the investigation, is it? So clearly there's some answers to be sought there, I think.
And I think, what happens is, the point about that foreword is the language that's used. It's not a question of belief, it's a question of knowledge, and the two are different things. It's like, people, do they believe, that in the UK it's now 8 minutes to 11 at night, or do they know it's 8 minutes to 11 at night? It's, there are certain things you can establish as fact and have knowledge about them, rather than having to believe they might be true or might not be true. And it's really that's again which differentiates what Dr. Judy has done from
between
most of
science and religion.
Yeah. And it's been able to say, actually I thought it was 10 to 11, but actually I'm wrong because I've picked up my clock and I've found that the battery is a bit low on power, so I need to go and get a new battery, plug it in and check what the real time is. If I can draw a quick analogy there, it's that sort of process where you're continually reviewing the evidence that's around you, and it is very tricky, it's very hard, but if you use your brain and you use what you know to be true, then again you can keep moving forward on that journey and you can come to some conclusions. And that's what this is all about.
Well, I'm sure you would both agree that your position on everything at the moment is only contingent on the evidence available to you now, and if something radically comes along to radically change that, then as scientists and rational people, you acknowledge that you will change your perspective. Absolutely. As the evidence suggests.
Yeah.
It really annoys me that scientists make these bold claims about the limits of the scope of their investigation. Surely they're looking for the truth. Yeah, that's no scientist. Either you're looking for the absolute truth in this, or you're agendaed. And you can't claim to be a scientist if you're promoting an agenda beyond the scope of the truth.
That's it.
I should never not to rant anymore.
Well, no, I totally agree. Speaking for myself, and not for Dr. Judy at all. I believed the official story of 9/11 for 3 years, and I've used that word of belief because that's what it was. I hadn't studied the evidence to know that it was false. So I then began to change my understanding because I started to look at the evidence, and that process was continual and ongoing, and it goes on to this day. Yeah. And so it's that whole process of learning and understanding through a study of the evidence which needs to be focused on. And I don't sit around and just say, you're an idiot because you've concluded this. I say, well, why are you saying that? What evidence have you got that you can explain to me to tell me why you think that conclusion is correct? Take your time, explain it to me step by step. Yeah. Let's see if it logically hangs together, Yeah. Of course, some of that comes down to your personality. I mean, my background, as I mentioned, is in computer programming, so I've got a fairly sort of logical, analytical brain,
Yeah.
And not everyone's like that, I accept that, but, that certainly helps, to have the start of that attitude, to go through this.
I have a logical pattern, but it's not the same as Andrew's. And mine is more of, well, if this piece fits like that, and that what's over there, how does that piece interact with that one? Looking at materials and processes and phenomena. And it's, you can't just, it isn't about jumping to the answer.
No, you certainly can't find the answer by starting with the answer that you want to find and then only looking at the evidence that supports that, can you?
There's another issue, too, is that, this issue of conspiracy theories. And by definition, research that is purely empirical cannot have anything to do with conspiracy theory. Because it's not about who is where and who said what to whom and who planned. Because a conspiracy theory is two or more people planning to commit a crime.
Absolutely. It's two different things, aren't they?
Yeah. But one other thing I'd like to point out, the popular chant, 9/11 was an inside job. Scientifically speaking, that's no different than saying 19 bad guys with box cutters did it.
Yeah, I guess so. You've got to be able to support you.
Pardon me?
I was going to say, it's not good enough to simply say anything, is it? You've got to be able to substantiate what you're saying with evidence.
I think that particular phrase has entered the vocabulary now of this region, and it's difficult sometimes to discipline yourself in perhaps being more accurate with that phrase, because it's a phrase I probably still use from time to time. And I suppose I don't think of it in the literal sense now so much. I think of it as being a way of saying that people who know that the official story is false within, official bodies which should be investigating 9/11 say that they lie, basically. So that's my sort of interpretation of this phrase that 9/11 is an inside job, in that it's just people who are in official capacity should know the previous official story is false, but yet they don't speak out. That's kind of, it doesn't really mean that, but that's my current interpretation of it.
my statement, I think now, a new one, I brought it off of somebody's radio show from last week. It's an inside-out job.
That's perhaps better, actually.
Yeah. So. My own personal favourite's 9/11 half-truth movement.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Andrew has an oath that they take. Yeah. Andrew has an oath that they take.
Oh yes, with certain true 9/11 truth figures. I just made up this oath for them, and it's they put them into a court, and you say to them, do you promise to tell some truth, some half truth, or anything but the truth? And it seems that we've just had a couple of things happen recently, which this seems pretty appropriate for to be read to them, and they can just say I do, and that's them covered, Yeah. So
I should make it clear at this point that Northeast Truth isn't taking sides in any of this. We're simply perfectly amenable to listening to everybody's sides of the discussion. So on that bit, I don't want to be inundated with people saying no, thermite's proved and whatnot. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just doing my little part to provide a.
What I say about the thermite is it's no different than chocolate chip cookies. I'm sure in the dust you could find traces of chocolate, traces of sugar, traces of nano wheat flour, nano wheat. And does that mean that chocolate chip cookies destroyed the towers?
Exactly. Well, one of the issues is as well that I don't know whether many people realise that thermite is basically nothing more than iron filings and powdered aluminium. And
it's iron oxide, that's right, yeah.
You can pretty much find it in any centre of civilization if you go looking for it.
That's right.
Or at least traces of it, I would have thought.
I mean, I had to dedicate a whole blog to thermite because it's still it's still like it's like a Dracula film where however many stakes you stick through the heart of thermite, it still keeps coming back to life the next morning, and it's a vampire that sucks people's energy, and I've had to dedicate a whole blog to this called 911thermitefree.blogspot.com, which essentially is reposting what I've got on my website, just so if people want to know why thermite just doesn't cut it, as I say, it's all there's all the blogs on there. You can see why Stephen E. Jones wouldn't submit the thermite evidence to the same process that Dr. Judy has in terms of the RFC. You can see the response I got to that from somebody on the UK forum when I pointed that out, and how they tried to attack me for pointing that out, even though it's true. Again, that's a whole kind of sideshow. This whole how we've had to address the thermite evidence and explain that it can't be that. They claim they've got these peer-reviewed papers, and they're not really peer-reviewed. I've also discovered a link to the formation of crop circles because of an element of this thermite study. People can find out about that. So, there's all these different threads to follow, and it is very time-consuming. I appreciate that, but we're just trying to speak about the evidence, and we'll continue to do that.
Clearly, there's I've looked into the thermite side of it, and I'll be the first one to admit that, like yourself, I was pretty much. I basically said, okay, it looks like thermite. It might have been involved, and knowing a little bit about explosives, these diagonal cut beams look very much like the work of shaped charges and what have you. What would you say to people in that who haven't had the chance to look at all the material?
You're going to take out a saw and cut down the building?
Well, yeah, it doesn't make sense, does it? But
but if you were able to cut through the building, how you bust up the building is you cut it off its foundation and slam it to the ground. There's no seismic signal that indicates it was slammed to the ground.
Well, it doesn't explain why it did. I mean, the most compelling argument I can see, just on bear in mind I've only had a week to research this, is that you can plainly see that the buildings turn to dust and then fall to the ground. Now, if you demolish a building, you can watch 1,000 of them on YouTube. When you blow a building up, you collapse the building, and the building is demolished by it hitting the ground, essentially. They almost always collapse intact, except at the interface where it's hitting the ground, and that's where the rubble and that is created. From the 9/11 footage, that isn't happening, nor is this pancake effect that everybody talked about in the official version, where you would clearly be able to see a process of slamming as they went down. That's not the case. It turns to dust.
I've got another easy one. Is